What characteristic or attribute about God gives you the most comfort? Well, certainly that answer could be up for debate. There's a lot of good ones. One thing that just comforts me so much about one of God's characteristics is just the fact that he is in control. As we open Matthew 2, we are introduced to something that looks like it's completely out of control, as we're seeing the vicious nature of King Herod towards Jesus in Matthew 2:16. Yet the beautiful thing about Scripture is its interconnectedness. And so while this is our first introduction to King Herod, the story of death, deceitfulness, and devastation is nothing new. So I just want to invite you to join me for the next couple minutes as we go on a trek from Genesis to Revelation and see how the story in Matthew is part of a much bigger story. So in Genesis 3, the serpent deceives Eve, and as a result, death, deceitfulness, and devastation enter the world. Amidst all of this despair is a promise. God promises one day the seed of Eve would crush the seed of the serpent. And yet what happens is Adam and Eve have their first child, and it's like they probably thought, okay, this is the seed that's going to crush the serpent. Yet do you remember who their first son was? It was Cain, and he was a murderer. And thus the story of death, deceitfulness, and devastation continue. In the book of Exodus, when the Israelites were in Egypt, they were told to kill the firstborn male children. This meant that the seed God had promised, that it would eventually come from Eve and crush the serpent, that story, that redemptive narrative was in danger. Yet the midwives proved to be shrewd as a serpent and harmless as a dove by refusing to do this. And thus, through their faithfulness, these two women, through their faithfulness, it comes a deliverer, Moses. In Revelation 12:4, we read that a dragon or serpent stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child. It says that she gave birth to a male child who will rule all the nations, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. When Christ was crucified, it looked like the serpent had won, as if he had devoured this child. But what we know is that's not the end of the story, right? He was snatched up to the throne of God as he was raised from the dead, and through his death, he inflicted a lethal blow on the serpent, who no longer held power over death. So now in Matthew 2, we see the narrative of the woman and the serpent playing out between Mary and Herod, who's trying to destroy the child. Yet the story of Scripture is this, that no matter how bleak the picture looks, God's plan will not be thwarted. While back in Genesis, Eve essentially said to God, "My will be done." Do you remember what Mary says when she is told about the birth of Christ? "Be it according to your word." In other words, thy will be done. Through Mary came the ultimate serpent crusher. And in Jesus' genealogy in Matthew 1 are faithful women like Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth, even Gentile women, through whom and through their faithfulness, the promise of the seed of Eve would come and destroy the serpent once and for all. So consider something in your life that looks pretty bleak at the moment. But along with that, consider that the same God who has orchestrated the whole of Scripture narrative is orchestrating the whole of your life, and his plans will not be thwarted. May we also say, let it be according to your will, Lord.